Who's under my desk? The voice came from the doorway. It was 10 minutes before 5 in the morning. Ren Novak came up off the carpet with her hand already at her mouth. Don't. Please don't. She said it under her breath. It was hardly a sound at all. She had been down there on her knees with a damp cloth. In the back corner, where the underside of the desk met the pedestal, her fingertips had found something that was not wood. Now she turned her other hand over and held it up. 3 words were written across her palm in black marker. The ink had smeared where her fingers had been closed on it. Everett Vance read them. He was 57. He owned most of the building he was standing in. He had walked into that room 10,000 mornings and had never once looked under the desk. He did not move for a moment. Then he did the thing Ren thought about for a long time afterward. He made his voice ordinary. Thank you. That's fine. You can finish up later. Yes, sir. Is this you every night? Every night, sir. I've never seen you. No, sir. You wouldn't. Well. He set his case down on the desk, quite normally, and did not look at her again. Good night, then. She wheeled her cart out against the wall and left it. She took the stairs down instead of the lift, and on the 8th landing, she sat on a cold step and shook until it passed. 9 days after that morning, a man was walked out. Through the front lobby of that tower in handcuffs, past 100 people who work for him. Some of them stood up. The woman who started it was still the only person in the building nobody could name. You already want to know what those 3 words said. Subscribe so the answer finds you. Back to the night before. The tower held 1,100 people in the daytime. At night, it held 12. Everything that happened over the next 9 days happened because nobody ever counted the 12. Vance Hollis put up its tower in Lindmore, Michigan. 41 floors of glass on a river that used to move freight. The company was 4 generations old and had never once been news. The day shift came in at 8. Their badges were white. They came through the front doors and took the passenger lifts on the left-hand wall, 6 of them, polished. The night crew came in at 11 through a steel door on the loading side. Their badges were gray. A gray badge did not call a passenger lift. It called the freight car at the back, which was scarred and slow. There were 12 of them. Dot Mazur had run the crew for 19 years. 3, 40, and 41, Dot said that first week. Nobody wants 41. Why not, Dot? Because a paper out of place up there is a whole phone call. Take 4 and 5. 4 and 5 is meeting rooms. I'll take 41. You'll take 41, Novak. I'll take 41. Dot looked at her a second longer than she needed to. Then she wrote it down. Dot was 61 and came up to Ren's shoulder. She wore a plum cardigan over the Navy uniform every night of her life. She knew what all 12 of them were called. Nobody upstairs did. Upstairs, they were the night crew or the vendor. On the invoices, they were a line item. A cart is a small country, and you learn its borders fast. Top tray for cloths. Middle for bags and gloves. Bottom for the vacuum. That bag comes out every night. It's half empty, Dot. Every night, not when it's full. A full bag runs the motor hot. A hot motor makes a smell. And a smell on 41 is a phone call. Ren changed the bag at the end of every shift for 3 years. She could do it in the dark. She learned other things nobody asked her to learn. The return grills in the ceilings came off with 4 screws. Always 4. The filters behind them were hers on the first of the month. The marble on 40 was cold enough to feel through her shoes. The oak on 41 was not. And she learned the buttons. Every keypad in that building had 4 worn smoother than the rest, or 3, or 5. Hands are honest, even when people are not. You clean like somebody's watching, Dot told her once. Somebody always is. Honey, nobody is. Dot went back to her coffee. That's the whole job. Ren laughed and let it go. She could not say the true thing, which was that she was not cleaning that building. She was reading it. 3 years before that morning, a man named Tomas. Novak counted a room and got the wrong answer. He was 49. He had run nights at Warehouse 3 for 11 years. He kept a flat carpenter's pencil behind his left ear. The room did not match the book. 8 pallets, over 5 quarters. So he wrote it up. That is the whole crime. It took him 2 evenings. "You're sure about this?" his wife said at the kitchen table. "I counted it 4 times. That's not what I asked you, Tomas." "Susie, it's 8 pallets. Somebody has to say it out loud, and it has to be you. It's my room." He handed the report to his own supervisor on a Thursday. 19 days later, Vance Hawas let him go for theft of inventory. Nobody came to the house. There was no charge and no arrest, because there was nothing to charge. There was a letter, and the letter used the word irregularity. In a town like Linmore, a letter is enough. Tomas filed an appeal and waited for a hearing. He was still waiting 11 weeks later, when his heart stopped in a parked car behind the pharmacy. The hearing was never scheduled. "They'll fix it," her mother said that first winter. "There's a process. There's a copy of everything." "Where?" "On the fridge, where it's been." The copy sat in a manila envelope on top of the refrigerator, under a jar of change. Suzanne Novak moved it when she cleaned and put it back exactly. It was a copy. That was the thing nobody in that kitchen wanted to say. The letter's a copy. The appeal's a copy, Mom. So the audit isn't. The one with the counts in it. The one that shows what he wrote down and when. Then ask them for it, Ren. I did. Twice. They send back 1 line, which is what? Original documents stay with the originator. Ren put the envelope back under the jar. It's on their own form. They wrote the rule and they keep the paper. Then that's that, Ren. That's not that. Ren. 19 days, Mom. He handed it in, and 19 days later, he was the thief. Somebody in that building has the page that proves the order it happened in. By the 2nd year, Suzanne had stopped saying, "They'll fix it." Let him rest. Mom. It wasn't the company that killed him. It was the waiting. Ren did not argue with her mother. She never argued with her mother. She just stopped talking about it, which is a different thing. 11 months later, a night cleaning contractor put a notice up at the unemployment office. 41 floors. 11 at night to 7 in the morning. No experience necessary. The vendor did the hiring, and the vendor did not run the tower's background check because the crew did not work for the tower. She used her own name. She had thought about not using it. Exactly 1 man in that building read the crew roster the week she started, saw Novak on it, and knew what it meant. He said nothing to anybody. That was Hal Brennan. He had taken Tomas Novak's key card back at the gate 3 years earlier and shaken his hand, and had not been able to look at him while he did it. Her badge opened everything on 3 except 1 door. 3 was the old floor. The boardroom was there, and meeting rooms nobody booked. At the end of a corridor that turned twice, there was a steel door with a keypad and no window. Records. The old room, from before the servers. Her gray badge lit the reader red every time. She tried it once a month, the way a person presses a bruise. She asked Hal about it in her 2nd week. That one's not on the contract. It's dusty under the door. It's dusty under a lot of doors, Novak. I'd do it for nothing. On my own time. You'd do what for nothing? Clean it. Hal Brennan looked at the floor. He was a big man, and he did not lie well. Nobody's been in that room in 3 years, he said. Legal hold. It's not mine to give. Whose is it? Nobody's. That's what a hold is. He picked up his radio. I'm sorry. So for 3 years, she cleaned the corridor up to that door and turned the cart around. 41 was different. 41 she had all night. She did it the long way, on her knees at the skirting, flat under the furniture. There was nowhere else in that building she was allowed to be thorough. There were glasses on that desk, thin metal frames, a hard case beside them. The first week, she found them lying on a stack of paper and had to move them to wipe the wood. She cleaned the lenses on the hem of her shirt and set them down square beside the case. Next night, they were back on the papers. She moved them again. She did that for a month. Then one night she came in and they were already beside the case, squared up, waiting for her. You all right? Said Dot at the lift. Somebody moved a pair of glasses. Move them where, Ren? Where I put before I got there. And that's a thing, is it? It's the only thing anybody's said to me in this building all year. That was the entire relationship. 9 days from the end of all this, in a room full of people, it would turn out to have been enough. They never met. He came up at 6:30. She was out by 5:30. 40 was the other kind of room. Black leather, gray marble, bottles in a cabinet that were never opened. Gideon Vance worked late, and he worked loud. He was 49, the younger brother, the chief operating officer. When Rin came in with the cart at midnight, he did not stop his call. No, I've got 4 of them where I want them. She emptied the bin. The 5th one wants a title. That's all it is. A title and a car. She wiped the arm of the sofa. He moved his elbow an inch, so she could get under it, the way a man moves for a door. Then give him the title. Titles are free. He did not lower his voice once. He did not look up once. She'll vote with the bloc. She always has. She hasn't had an opinion since the merger. When he shook hands, he took a flat packet from his jacket after, and did his fingers one at a time. When Ren had gone, he wiped the arm of the sofa again. It never occurred to him that she could hear. That was the 9th. The board had called an extraordinary meeting for the 18th, and all that week. Everett Vance had been coming in at 4 in the morning instead of 6:30, which is why on the 16th, Ren was still on 41 at 20:05. She was doing the far corner, not the front of the pedestal where anybody runs a cloth. The back inside angle, under the desk, where a grown woman has to lie down to reach. Her cloth went along the grain and stopped. Something flat, not wood, not screwed, not dust. She read it the way she read everything, by touch. A rectangle the size of a thumbnail. A rubber edge where it had been taped. One small hole at one end. And a light so small it was more a color than a light. She lay very still under a man's desk, while her heart went. She had seen one of these on a slide at the vendor's induction 3 years ago, in a room over the loading dock. Then her mind did the thing that saved everything. If it is live, it is listening now, which meant she could not say it. Not out loud, not to him, not to anybody in that room. The second the word was spoken, the man on the other end would know it had been found, and he would have all night to be somewhere else. There was no pin she could reach without standing up. There was a black marker quipped to her own belt for the bag labels. She wrote 3 words on her left palm, upside down, with her hand shaking. The door opened. "Who's under my desk?" She came up off the carpet with her hand at her mouth. "Don't. Please don't." And she turned the other hand over and held it up to a man she had never spoken to in 3 years. "They hear you." Everett Vance did not call security. He sat at his own desk at 5 in the morning and turned pages he was not reading. The alternative was to walk out and let a room know it had frightened him. At 6, he went down to 2 and knocked on a door with a hand-drawn sign on it. Hal Brennan had run facilities in that tower for 22 years. He owned the air handling, the card, readers, and every wireless channel between the basement and the roof. That mattered because a man carrying a spectrum analyzer through that building was not a spy. He was a Tuesday. How long if I ask you not to write a ticket? 2 days. Hal thought about it. 3. Do it slow. Do it the way you do it anyway. You going to tell me what I'm looking for, Everett? No. Then I'll find whatever's there. So Hal did what he did 4 times a year. He walked the floors with the handset on his belt and the little gray box in his hand. He complained to people about the microwave in the 4th floor kitchen. He wrote his numbers in the same notebook he always used. On the 2nd afternoon, he came up to 41 and shut the door behind him. It's not what you're afraid of. Say it plainly, Hal. It's not broadcasting out of the building. There's no uplink. Everett put the glasses down beside the case. Meaning what? Meaning it's short range and it's low power. Whatever's picking that up is inside these walls. How far is short range, Hal? 2 floors. 3 at the outside, through slab. So it's a person with an office. It's a person with an office. There is a moment in this kind of thing when a man decides what he will allow himself to think. Everett stood at 41 floors of glass, with the river going gray underneath him, and did not let himself get to the end of the sentence. Everybody on that list was somebody he had hired. Can you tell me which floor? Not without walking every one of them with this in my hand. Slow. Twice. Then do it. Then somebody asks me why, Hal said, and I'd have to answer them. And whoever it is would hear about it by lunch. Then don't. Nobody standing in that office on the 17th knew that the answer was one floor down. It had been one floor down for 4 months. Everything that came after turned on that one floor. At 6 that evening, on 40, a man took a small, molded earpiece out of his ear and set it on the marble. He took the flat packet out of his jacket and did his fingers one at a time. Then he wiped the earpiece too and put it away and went to dinner. Here is what the listener heard at 10 minutes to 5 on the morning of the 16th. A door. A man's voice, sharp. Who's under my desk? Then a rustle that might have been a whisper and might have been cloth. Then the same man, perfectly calm. Thank you. That's fine. Nothing about a device. Nothing about a wire or a bug or a room being swept. And that was worse. A woman had been lying at the exact spot where a thing was taped, and a man had gone quiet. And then that man had made his voice ordinary. A person who has spent his life reading. People knows what an ordinary voice costs. Gideon Vance did not panic. He made it somebody else's problem in writing. On the 17th, a memo went to the audit committee from the chief operating officer. It noted that out-of-hours access to executive floors by vendor staff had never once been reviewed, and it attached a log. The log showed one badge on 41 between 11 and 5 every night for 3 years. Gray. Vendor. One name. It's a fair question, said the woman from the audit committee on a call. It's his question. It's still a fair one, Everett. Have you ever met the person who empties your bin? He had no answer for that. She was not wrong, and that was the whole trouble. Kip Marsden came down to the basement at 1 in the morning with 2 men and a clipboard. Lockers open, please. 12 gray metal doors. A photograph taped inside one. A tin of coffee. A pair of house shoes. He got to Wren's and put his hand on it. Dot Mazur stepped in front of it. You've got a paper for this? I've got instructions. That's not what I asked you. He waited. Ma'am, step aside. 19 years. Dot did not move. 19 years, and nobody has opened one of these. You want to be first? You can say your own name out loud while you do it. Kip Marsden. Louder. Kip Marsden. Then he opened it anyway. There was nothing in it. A cardigan. A hairbrush. A folded plastic bag. He went through the carts after that. He lifted the vacuum and set it down again. He wrote something on the clipboard, and they left. What was that? Said one of the men out in the corridor. That was them counting us, Dot said. Upstairs on 40, Gideon Vance had the log open on his screen. He was not looking at a woman. He was looking at a row. 3 years of the same badge number, the same floors, the same 8 hours. Going down the page like a heartbeat. He had walked past her 400 times. He could not have told anybody what color her hair was. The second thing the memo did was bigger, and it was aimed at 12 people. Pending the review, the night cleaning contract was placed under notice. That is, 4 words on a page. On the floor of the basement locker room, it meant something else. And Dot Mazur had to be the one to say it, because that is what a supervisor is. 60 days. Then they either renew us or they put it out to tender. They'll renew. They'll take the cheaper bid. That's what a tender is for. Somebody asked what they were supposed to have done. Nothing, Dot said. That's the point of it. Nobody has to have done anything. She found Wren afterwards by the freight car, and she did not say any of it gently. Whatever it is you're in. Dot. Whatever it is. Get out of it. There's 12 of us, and 11 of them have got nothing else. Ren looked at the floor. I know. Do you? I know exactly how much there is. Dot put a hand flat on her arm and left it there a second, which from Dot was a great deal. Then be quiet, she said, and let it blow past. It was good advice. It was the best advice anybody gave her in those 9 days. At 4 the next morning, Ren stood in a dark office on 41 and asked a man for something no cleaner has ever asked anybody for. Put me on 40. Everett Vance turned around. Say that again? Move me. Nights, permanent. 40 and 41 both. It's one line on a schedule, and your brother's floor is on my badge already. So nobody has to sign anything new. Do you know what you're asking me for? Yes, sir. Then say the rest of it out loud. I'm asking you to put me in the room. There is a version of this where he says no, and she goes home, and a company changes hands in the morning. He thought about it for a long time. He was not a reckless man. He had spent 30 years not being one. Why? He said. And don't tell me it's loyalty. I've never spoken to you. Ren had a whole answer ready. 3 years of it, in a manila envelope on top of a refrigerator. Because I'm the only one who can, she said. Nobody watches me. That's the whole job. It was true. It was also not the reason, and she did not give him the reason, and he did not know he was looking at Tomas Novak's daughter. Nobody in that room knew it, except her. He was quiet for a while. Then he took the glasses off and put them down square beside the case. 2 rules, he said. You don't open anything that's locked. And the second you feel wrong about it, you walk out, and you keep walking. And that's not a failure. That's the instruction. Yes, sir. Say it back. I walk out, and I keep walking. Good. He looked at her properly then, maybe for the first time. What do I call you? Ren. He said it once, quietly, the way people do when they are trying to make a thing stick. He bought it himself, with cash, in a shop on the west side that also sold luggage. A voice recorder the size of a stick of gum. A cheap phone with 100 minutes on it. He gave her both in the basement car park at 11:10 at night. If it goes wrong, it's mine. Sir, you were told to do it by the chief executive. Say it back to me. I was told to do it by the chief executive. Now the other thing, Ren, I walk out, and I keep walking. Good. He did not let go of the bag. Ren, it is only a company. It isn't, she said. Not to everybody. The recorder went into the seam of the big leather sofa. On 40, along the underside, where the hide folds under the frame and a hand has to go in past the wrist. She did it at 2:20 with a cloth in her other hand, on her knees, in the posture. She had been in every night for 3 years. That was the whole trick. And it was not a trick. She was not pretending to clean. She was cleaning. Then she did the marble and the glass and the bin. She was at the door when the lift chimed in the corridor. Men who are about to win cannot sleep. That is the only reason a man comes back to his own office. At 2:30 in the morning, Ren had 4 seconds. She could not get out, and she could not get back to the sofa. So she picked up the flat packet of wipes from the corner of his desk, turned it over, and poured the whole thing onto the marble. 40 wipes, wet, in a spreading gray heap. The smell went up like a wall. The door opened. What in God's name? I'm so sorry, sir. It slipped. Gideon Vance stopped in the doorway with his hand still on it. He did not come in. He did not look at the sofa, or the desk, or her. He looked at the wet heap on his marble, and his whole face closed. Get it up. Yes, sir. With your hands? I'll be quick, sir. Get it up and get out. Don't touch anything on the way. No, sir. She got down and picked them up one at a time. Gloves would have been faster. She wanted him standing in that doorway as long as she could keep him there. He waited in the corridor until it was done. He did not step on that floor again until she had gone past him with the bag. He never once looked at the sofa. Now, before we go on, if you're still with me, do me one small thing. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I like knowing how far this one travels. All right. Back to the 40th floor. They listened to it in a stairwell on 11 because 11 was empty. And stairwells have no ceilings worth talking about. 2 hours of a man on the telephone. Most of it was nothing. A restaurant booking. A car. A long stretch where he read numbers out to somebody, and neither of them said what the numbers were. Then, at 1 minute past 11 on the night of the 16th, Gideon Vance shut his own door. It's done. I have 5. Everett stood very still. No, not the votes. The votes were never the thing that worried me. A pause. A chair. He's opened 3 again. Wren felt the whole stairwell go quiet inside her ears. 3 years, and he lets it lie. And now, this quarter, he asks the archive for the whole run. Every count sheet. Why now? That's what I need to know. And that's why I've got ears on him. The other voice said something. Because if he reads the count sheets in order, he'll see it. It's not clever. It was never clever. It's 4 lanes that ran on paper and never ran on a road. Everett put his hand flat on the wall. Meridian freight, Gideon said. 11 quarters. And it balanced. Right up until the room stopped balancing. And the room stopped balancing. Because there was a man out there counting it twice. Wren did not move. The nightman wrote it up. He put it in writing and he handed it to his own supervisor like a schoolboy. A laugh. Short. So the nightman took it. What else was it going to be? You can't have a gap and no thief. It's the one thing an auditor won't sign. Somebody asked him something. Novak. Tomas. I don't know. I never met him. Then, in a different tone, flatter. The voice of a man saying a thing he has said to himself many times. He signed a form. I signed a different one. That's all that ever happened. Everett Vance took the earbud out and held it in his hand. Wren. Yes, sir. That name. She did not cry, and afterwards she was glad about that, because she had wanted very badly to be able to say the next part clearly. He was my father. Nobody said anything for a while. 2 floors up, somebody ran water. You knew, he said. When you asked me for 40, you knew. I didn't know it was your brother. I swear to you, I didn't know that. But you knew what you were looking for 3 years. He nodded slowly. He was not a stupid man, and he could feel the whole shape of it arriving. And he did not much like what it made him. I would not have let you in that room, he said. If you'd told me. I know. That's why I didn't. There was 1 more minute on the recording, and they let it run. Everything from that quarter's still in the old room on 3, Gideon said. It's been sitting there 3 years, and nobody has opened that door in all that time. Paper. A drawer. After Friday, it gets cleared. Weaglehold comes off Friday, and then there is no count sheet, and there is no nightman, and there is nothing but a company I run. The meeting of the board was at 10 o'clock on the 18th. Friday was the 19th. A recording is not a document. Hal Brennan said so at 5:30 that morning in the corridor. On 3, because somebody had to. He'll say it's a fake. He'll say it was got illegally. He'll be half right. It's his own voice. And by the time anybody sorts that out, he's been chairman a month. Then we open the door, Everett said. The reader on that door reports to security. Security is Marsden this week. So you badge in at 6 in the morning on the day of the board, and he knows before the light comes on. Everett had no answer to that. It was Wren who spoke. You don't need the door. Both men looked at her. There's a return grill in the ceiling out here, and there's one in there. Same Putnam. I changed those filters on the 1st of the month. How big is it, Wren? Big enough for me. And how is it fixed? 4 screws, she said. It's always 4 screws. Hal brought a stepladder up from 2 and set it under the grill. Then he went away, because he was a man who did not go past a line, and everybody in that corridor knew it. She was inside by 20 to 7. The old records room had no window, and 1 fluorescent tube that came on with a stutter, metal shelving to the ceiling, boxes with no lids, dust lying so flat and so long it had gone the color of the floor. She found the quarter in 11 minutes. Count sheets, In a hand she had watched write shopping lists. All capitals. The sevens crossed. And clipped to the front of the run, the thing that had never left the building. The internal audit. Original. Wet signed. Dated 19 days before a letter that used the word irregularity. Her father's report was inside it. Not summarized. Attached in full as the source. Received from T. Novak, Warehouse 3, Night Supervisor. Discrepancy first reported by employee. She sat down on the floor in her uniform and put her hand over her mouth. It had been 11 minutes away the whole time, behind a door that lit red. Then the reader outside beeped. She was behind the end shelf before she decided to be. The door opened and the corridor light came in and stopped, where it always stops, at the edge of the dust. Gideon Vance did not come in. You, sir, how did you get in here? She said nothing. He looked at the floor between them. 3 years of dust, unmarked, except for one set of prints going in. He did not step on it. Stay where you are, Mr. Vance. The vest pocket. Give it to me. She gave him the phone. There was one number in it. He looked at it for a second, and something in his face settled, almost with relief. A thing he had not been able to name had just become a thing with a shape. You're his, he said. Then he pulled the door shut. The bolt went over. The corridor light went off underneath it, and the fluorescent tube stuttered twice and gave out. And after that, there was nothing at all. Out in the corridor, the stepladder was already gone. Marsden had walked it down to 2 at 6:45 on rounds, the way a man does when a ladder is standing where no ladder should be. The board of Vance Hollis was seated 1 floor below her at 10 o'clock. Nobody in that room knew where she was. Nobody was going to. The dark in a room with no window is a complete dark. There is nothing for the eye to come around to. Wren let herself be frightened for 4 minutes. Then she stopped. She knew that room. She had walked it with the light on. Shelving on 3 walls. Boxes down the middle. A door that opened outward and had no handle on the inside. And 9 feet above the back shelf, a metal panel she had come through an hour ago. He had locked the door. She had never used the door. The ladder was gone. She knew that before she tried. A ladder that is still standing makes a sound when a man walks past it. So she built one. Document boxes. Full. The heavy kind that get filled to the lid and then sat on. She counted them by feel and carried them one at a time to the back wall. 4 across for the bottom. 3 on that. 2 on that. 3 years of a company's paper and a woman. Climbing it in the dark to get out of the room it had buried her father in. At the top, she put her palm flat on the ceiling until she found the seam. 4 screws. It is always 4 screws. She came out into the corridor ceiling at 8 minutes to 10 and hung and dropped and came down hard on the carpet 40 feet from a boardroom door. She did not run for the stairs. 2 men on that floor had radios and a woman in uniform carrying loose. Paper is the easiest thing in the world to stop. So she went to the alcove where the crew kept the carts. She took the vacuum off her own, pulled a fresh bag out of the middle tray, and slid 19 pages of audit into it. She squared the collar into the housing and clicked the cover shut. Then she pushed the cart out at a walking pace, the way she had pushed it every night for 3 years. Kip Marsden came down on her before she had gone 20 feet. Stop there. Yes, sir. Hands. She showed him her hands. He tipped the cart over and went through the cloths, and the gloves with his boot, and then with his hands. Turn out the vest. There's nothing in it. Turn it out. She turned it out. There was nothing in it. Where have you been since 8? Cleaning, sir. Nobody's seen you since 8. Nobody ever does. He lifted the vacuum by the handle, turned it once, and set it down again. Gideon Vance had come out of the boardroom. He stood 8 feet away with his coat over his arm. Well, nothing on her. Nothing at all, Marsden? Nothing at all, sir. Cart's clean. The machine. Checked it, sir. Open it. Kip looked down at the gray paper bag. Housing. Dusty at the seam, with a smear on the cover. where a hand had shut it. Sir, that's the dust bag. There was a silence of about 2 seconds. Never mind, Gideon said. Walk her out. The front doors. I want the guard to see her go. There was exactly one thing in that corridor he would not put his hand into. He had been not putting his hand into it for 3 years. And that was when the freight car opened at the end of the corridor. Dot Mazur had signed off at 3 minutes past 7. The sheet was unsigned on the line above her own. She had gone home, and then she had started calling the crew in the middle of their sleep. It's Dot. Get up. Dot, it's 7:30. The girl didn't sign out. So in 3 years, that girl has never once not signed out. Get your coat. 11 of them came. 12 people in Navy came down a carpeted corridor on the 3rd floor. It was 4 minutes past 10 in the morning. Not one of them had ever been in that building awake. Kip Marsden put a hand out and got Dot Mazur's shoulder. Dot looked at the hand until he took it off. Son, there's 12 of us and 1 of you. Ma'am, and not one of us is going to touch you. They opened the boardroom doors. 22 people sat around a long table with the river behind them. A resolution was on the screen. Gideon Vance's chair at the head of it was still warm. A woman in a cleaner's uniform came in past the directors, pushing an upright vacuum. Somebody laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the noise people make when a thing does not fit. I'm sorry, Wren said. This will take a minute. Who let her in here? I did, Dot said. All of us did. Wren set the machine on the polished oak. She unclipped the cover, pulled the paper bag out, and tore it open along the seam. Dust went up into that white light like smoke. 19 pages came out onto the table. That's the internal audit. 3rd quarter, 3 years ago. Original, wet signed. Get her out of here. It's been in the old room on this floor the whole time, and it gets shredded tomorrow. Sit down, Gideon. That was the chair of the audit committee. She did not raise her voice either. Gideon Vance sat down. They read it at the table. It took 11 minutes, and nobody left. And nobody spoke except the woman from audit. Meridian Freight Lines. 11 quarters. Meridian's a haulier. We use them. That was a director halfway down the table. Meridian is 4 lanes with no fuel, no tolls, and no driver hours. And a signature authorizing every one of them. Whose signature? She did not answer that. She turned the page and read the line in the plain box near the top. Discrepancy first reported by employee. Received from T. Novak, Warehouse 3. Reported, somebody said. It says reported. 19 days before you fired him for it, Wren said. I have never met that man. No, he was my father. Everett put the recorder on the table and pressed it once. The room listened to a man's own voice, in his own building, saying that 4 lanes had run on paper and never on a road, and then saying the other thing, the flat thing. He signed a form. I signed a different one. 2 directors got up and moved along the wall, away from the head of the table. After that, it was not a meeting anymore. The resolution was never put. It did not need to be voted down. It was simply not put, which in the minutes of a company is the coldest thing that can happen to a piece of paper. 2 investigators from the county prosecutor's office had been in the lobby since 9:30. Everett had filed the report himself the night before. He had told nobody in that room. Gideon went out through the front lobby at 20 past. 11, with a man on either side of him. Past the security desk. Past 100 people who worked for him. Some of them stood up. He did not look at any of them. He had never looked at any of them. Afterwards, there was a hallway, and coffee nobody drank. I keep thinking one honest person saved this company. No, Dot said. 12 of them did. You just never learn their names. Say them. What? I'll write them down. Say them, Dot. You're not serious. I have never been more serious in my life. Start at the top of the sheet. She said them. It took a while. He did not look up once. In the spring, the company settled with the estate of Tomas Novak. The letter with the word irregularity in it was withdrawn, and a second letter went into the manila envelope on the refrigerator. where the first one's copy had lived. Well, Suzanne said, Mom, it's the same paper. Isn't that a thing? It's the exact same paper. Then she folded it in half and put it in her apron pocket, and went and stood at the sink a while, and Wren let her. The night crew came off the vendor contract in October. The badges changed with the contract, because badge color was never a rule about people. It was a line in a purchasing system. On a Tuesday in November, at 5 in the morning, 12 people in Navy walked in through the front doors and stood in front of the passenger lifts on the left-hand wall. 6 of them, polished. Anybody going to press it? Somebody said. Dot pressed it. It came. Nobody said anything on the way up, and that was fine. And on 41, at 20 past 5, a woman who had a name in that building now went in with a cloth and did the desk the long way, on her knees at the skirting. She cleaned the lenses on the hem of her shirt. She set them down square beside the case. Now let me ask you something. What would you have done, holding a stranger's secret in your hand, with nobody in the world who would believe you? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. Rest easy now. There will be another one waiting the next time you come this way.